Hello, everybody. We're going to let everybody kind of join in. I am here with Eve Rodsky, which I know you guys have probably heard me talk about a few times today. Eve knows that I always am dropping Eve's name. I am going to put in the, just as we have some people just joining for this session or haven't been here for the rest of the day. So I'm going to drop in our chat where you can continue the conversation with us over in our Discord channel. So please come over there and chat with us if you have any concerns or questions throughout. That is the place to get to us the quickest. You can email us too, but our whole team is over there right now and can communicate with you. And then also I'm going to drop the link to our Summit store where you can get Eve's book that we'll talk about a little bit, and also where you can get other information about our amazing sponsors that we have. And so this session is brought to you, because we got to have all that this session is brought to you by the amazing brand Loyal Hannah. I met the founders of Loyal Hannah at the Riveter Summit back in November, and it is a fabulous mom duo team that really have their values of their company at the heart of what they do, and they truly care about providing amazing maternity and postpartum clothes for moms, especially moms that are going back to work, but also moms that are at home working from home, because we at least need to look good on the top half for these videos, chats. But they're just really practical, but also nice, fashionable clothes. So you can get a discount for that by going to our Summit store and check out more about Loyal Hannah. But now let's dive in to why we are truly here to talk with Eve Rodsky, who is the author of one of my favorite books. And not that it was my favorite book because I was like, oh, this is such a good book, but that it was a kick in the butt, and also one that talks about so many issues that are near and dear to my heart, and ones that are affecting moms all over the globe. And so we're really going to kind of, me and Eve were just chatting, we're going to hit on some like deep systemic issues that are happening that Eve really talks about in her book. But also, how can we actually take action today? How can we start? Like, this is a huge issue that we're going to chat about today, but how can you start doing stuff today to make a difference? And I always tell people that the first time I read Fair Play, I was like, oh, yes, yes, yes. And I really loved the talk of these big issues, but I tried to throw it all at my husband at one time. That was funny. That doesn't work. And so I learned that quickly, and I'm sure you will talk about that a little bit. So I want to first kick off with, if you have not seen an article that has something to do with Fair Play recently and you're paying attention to the news, then I don't know, because Eve has been just about everywhere. But I got that Wall Street Journal article. My famous article,
I love it.
Toilet paper, but it's so much about fair play. And so Eve is just reshaping this discussion about the household and about who should be doing what and how we can truly make it fair. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And we will not be taking any full questions probably, because we're just going to have a lot of conversation, but we want you to continue this conversation in our Discord channel, and we can talk about later. Okay, so Eve, I want you to tell me really why you got into this work. Why is your background, and instead of me telling you about it, why is your background kind of pretty unique that led you to writing Fair Play?
Well, thanks, Brooke, for hearing this story again, because it's written in Fair Play, so you've probably now heard it 4 times. But I think it's important to set the context, because the day that inspired me to write this book is so similar to a lot of days that mothers are reporting how they're feeling right now, like that the literal space-time continuum is collapsing on us. And it was a day like that that spurred Fair Play. It was 8 years ago. It was a typical day in my life where my husband decided to send me a text that said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." Now let's talk about what unraveled from the "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries" text. first I want to have you picture the scene, Brooke, because again, it sort of reminds me of the space-time continuum of today. Breast pump and diaper bag on the passenger seat of my car, gifts for a newborn baby to return in the backseat of my car. I had opted out of the traditional workforce. And I put that now in quotes because I've subsequently learned on my journey that I didn't opt out of anything. I was pushed out of the traditional workforce. So any of you that thinks this is a private issue, I promise you it's actually a public issue, and we'll talk about that. But at the time, I thought I would start my own business because that would give me more time and flexibility, Brooke. So I had a client contract because I'm a lawyer and a mediator. So I had this, a client contract on my lap that I was marking up with a pen that was literally stabbing me in the vagina every time I hit the brakes. And as I'm marking up this contract and racing to get my older son, Zach, who was 3 at the time, from his toddler transition program, which in America, right, because we value working families less like a second, I get this freaking text in the middle of all that. And so I don't know, there was something about it that just had me pull over, which in LA, Brooke, we don't do that fatally because we don't want to get stuck in traffic. So I pulled over and I just started crying. I started crying thinking, first, I think I was really grieving for why my marriage was going to end. And I was feeling like such a cliche that I became this person who wanted to leave my marriage over off-season blueberries, or that I became the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs. And that's who I was to him. But what I was really thinking was, I used to be able to manage employee teams. And I prided myself on that. And then now I'm in a place where I'm so overwhelmed, I'm not even managing a grocery list. And I think even bigger than that, it was thinking about how did I get here where I became the default, or as I call in Fair Play, the she-fault for literally every single household and childcare task for my family. I will tell you, Brooke, that it was not supposed to happen to me. And this is where my background comes in for 2 reasons. One, I'm the product of a single mother. So they called me a parental child. I was her partner. I had a chemical bank checkbook that she gave me at 7, and I would help her stay on top of her bills. If an eviction notice came in, we would make sure to pay the rent. Starting at 7, I vowed I would never have this happen to me, that I would have an equal partner in life. And on top of that, I'm a Harvard-trained mediator and lawyer. So I'm actually trained to use my voice. I am trained to communicate. So I figured that if this shock and surprise that I didn't have the career marriage combo I thought I was going to have was happening to me, it was probably happening to other women. And I guess the good news for Fair Play, but the bad news for society that we even need it, was that nothing has really changed since 1960 on this issue.
Yeah, it hasn't at all. And I think it has become extremely apparent right now. And I know that we've had this conversation before, but I also felt pushed out, and I talked about that earlier this morning, about kind of what my career looked like. And I still question, if society was different, if we were able to push all of these ideas of fair play forward, will I have made a different choice? Probably, because I wouldn't have felt pushed out. Right. But we are told we opted out. That
That's right. Right. Like I'm a loser, right? Because I asked for these policies that, the perfect example is all I wanted to stay in the corporate workforce was to work from home on Fridays.
Yeah.
And my direct supervisor said that because that was her situation, she was not allowed to go to bat for me for it because it would showcase that she had it. Mm-hmm. And so I think this idea of organizing where you say, I want what they have, you either can hide and say, well, I have it, so I'm going to guard it. Or you can say, I want to fight for everybody to have what I have. Yeah. And again, it wasn't her particular fault, but it was as you said earlier, a systemic problem that corporations are dealing with. And we'll definitely talk about sort of the fair pay, fair play, fair day agenda later on that I am working really hard on with a care coalition. So we'll talk about the policy stuff, but I think it's really important to start where fair play starts, which is actually in your home.
Yeah. And I think that, so much stuff starts in our house. So many issues stem from that. We always talk about how, we want to raise our kids, our boys, so they're nice to girls. We want to make sure that we are raising our girls so they, have a strong voice. We want to, do all of that. But if we also don't leave the home and advocate for others as much as we're advocating in our own home, none of that's ever going to get changed. And so I love that you, and maybe we can actually go start talking about kind of those bigger issues, because I think it's a good leeway that, you saw what was happening for you. You saw these issues that were probably not just happening for you, but happening for millions. And to quote a mom that I talked about earlier today, Mickey Agrawal, she talks about how if you have that issue and it's really hard for you, and then that millions of other people are having the same issue, then likely you're going to start some big movement or some big company. And so you have started this big movement. So let's talk about now, having left the home, like we'll go back to the home in a little bit, but about some practical things that we can do. But what are those systemic big issues that we have got to change? I know a lot of them are being brought up right now. Tech companies, my husband works for Twitter, which, they now have said that everybody can be remote. Well, great, but like, how is that going to transfer down? Is that going to still support, the average household? So let's talk about some of those big issues.
Absolutely. Well, first, I will say that work from home is not the same as flexible work. Yeah. And too many people are conflating that right now. So I just want to put that out there. So the more that as women, we can keep pushing that there's a distinction between work from home and flexible work. So that's one. But the real issue, and I just put it in the chat, and thank you, Natasha, for your comment. But the number one, we can start with rule one, because rule one is really the basis for fair play, Brooke, and it came from the research, the curiosity that I had no idea I was going to write a book on the gender division of labor. I'm a family mediator. I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession. And what I do for those families, every one of you should feel bad for me, but what I do for them is I allow 3 generations of family members who maybe when I first was hired by them, every time, one of my client's son would talk, my client would storm out of the room. That's a very typical example. To a place where we work around the table, making the most difficult financial and organizational decisions with some grace and humor and generosity. So that's my lens. I'm a mediator. I'm a lawyer for these very highly complex families. So that's the lens I brought in here. And that's really, I was looking for organizational systems for the home. So I remember saying, like, this may be a systems problem, because invisible work was one of the terms. Second shift is another term. Emotional labor is another term. Mental load. You may have heard all these terms. My favorite was invisible work. So I kept thinking, well, if you can't value what's invisible. So I started this project as a goal to value the invisible. And I really thought that was going to be from just writing it out. But I did start, Brooke, with something that was called the Should I Do spreadsheet. It started very granular, where I asked women like you and women all over the country, things like, what do you do with that may be visible to your partner that takes more than 2 minutes of your day? And the Should I Do spreadsheet sort of went viral, even though I want to retire that word. I think in this time, we don't need to say we're going viral. But, it went through different communities where women, and this gets back to the community, Brooke, of women who you realize this is not just a private issue. Women I didn't even know started contributing to my Should I Do spreadsheet that had, attending dental appointments. It had making your child's lunch 10 minutes. It had logging onto the school form portal. I don't know, my entire fucking lifetime right now, but back then it was probably like 20 minutes. But then women I didn't even know started saying things to me. I received your spreadsheet from a friend. I didn't see Elf on the Shelf on here. That's 1 hour times 20 nights. What happened to, Girl Scout cookies ordering in sales? That's 5 hours. What about sunscreen? 2 minutes to apply, but it's 30 minutes for the chase. And all of a sudden I started getting this communal response that turned into this giant spreadsheet called the Should I Do spreadsheet. And I sent it off to Seth one day, the 19 million megabyte spreadsheet after 9 months of work. And I only got that one sad emoji, Brooke, the poor monkey covering its eyes. I didn't even get the courtesy of the 3-monkey trio. And I think that day I realized that lists alone don't work. Actually, the New York Times front page had an article about Japan where a woman created a spreadsheet for her husband, and she had 202 tasks and he had 21. Spreadsheets don't work. We've been making lists for 100 years. So what does? Well, systems do. Treating our home as our most important organization does. But to get there, we need to talk about rule 1, which is that all time is created equal. So what I didn't expect, I saw all the issues around unfairness, like the spreadsheet issues. I'm the one doing the Einstein project, women locking out their husbands because of glue sticks. One man in White Plains said he was locked out of his house over a glue stick, bless his heart. Fair play is now a love letter to men because that is not unfair. Women telling me that they're divorcing over beard shavings. Women at the summit, people who are like the women logging in here, a woman, a COO of her company, telling me that her biggest problem is getting her husband to remember to take out the kitty litter, not running her publicly traded company. So while everything was presenting small, that the small details were creating the biggest problems, like who's logging onto the school forum portal, who's setting the table when we're hangry and cranky. As a mediator, we are trained to know that the presenting problem is never the real problem, most cases. And so to dig deeper to find the presenting problem, I went out, I interviewed 500 men and women that mirrored the US Census in terms of socioeconomic status and reported ethnicity. And here's the real problem. The real problem, Brooke, was that men, women in society, we view men's time as finite like diamonds, and we value and view women's time as infinite like sand. That was it. So what do I mean by that? I'll just say that one more time. We guard men's time like diamonds, like we would guard diamonds. We treat and value women's time like sand, as infinite. So that was manifesting itself in the workplace. We know that women's time is not valued the same as men's time because we're not paid the same for it. If you're a woman of color, it's even worse. The discrepancy is about 40 cents on the dollar between a white man and a woman of color. So we know that. We know that if women enter a male profession, Brooke, the wages go down. But what I didn't realize was that this would become my most popular note. So as you see, I take notes. This is from my second book. I have thousands of moleskins, well, hundreds of moleskins at this point. Yeah. But I start, as a sociologist would do, even though this is not a sociological study, but it pretty much is because I have a huge sample. And I was consulted by sociologists and psychologists. I started writing this symbol next to so many different interviews with women. And that was a symbol that said, complicit in your own oppression. And what I mean by that was that I didn't expect women to be the biggest guarders of men's time. So women were saying to me all over this country, of course, I'm the one picking my child up if they're sick. I'm the one doing all the extra load in my, work in my home because my husband makes more money than me. He has a more stable job. I'm an entrepreneur, whatever it is. Okay, as we just said, that's a terrible argument for women because even in the same jobs, we don't make the same amount of money. The two other most popular things I heard were women say to me, I'm wired differently. My husband's better at focusing on one task at a time. This is hetero cisgender relationships, but it transfers over to same sex, and we could talk about that later. I'm wired differently. I'm better multitasker. I have a different brain. I have better executive function. Okay, so I went to the top neuroscientist, Brooke, in the world. One of the top neuroscientists in the world who I have access to because of my clients, they fund them. And this man, this old white dude, very typical, hair coming out of his ears. When I asked him, are women better multitaskers? Are we wired differently for all this unpaid invisible work? He just looked at me, Brooke, and said, oh, well, imagine, Eve, I could convince you, me, half the population, men, could convince you, the other half of the population, that you're better at wiping asses and doing dishes. How great for my half of the population. So that was the only other day I cried, Brooke, other than my Blueberries Day, where I sobbed in this man's office because it was taking off all these barriers I'd put on myself. And then women, a lot of women, even primary breadwinners, said to me, in the time it takes me to tell him what to do, I might as well do it myself. So I went to my good friend Dan Ariely, who's one of the top behavioral economists in the world, and he said that's the worst argument he's ever heard for women. Of course, it makes sense to tell someone how to wipe asses and do dishes because it's coming at the expense of using your time in a way more valuable way for you, for your career, for your mental health, for your sanity. And finally, even women and men in the same job, 2 shipping supervisors, 2 colorectal surgeons, still women were saying to me, he's better at focusing on one task at a time and I can find the time. So I guess what I'm here to say is that unless you are somehow Albert Einstein, which I wish I was now, and you can fuck with the space-time continuum, there's actually no way to find time. And it's just, we have a very different expectation over how women are supposed to use their time. And in a time when we literally don't have any time or boundaries, this barrier to the fairness in the home is something we all need to own ourselves. That our time is equal to our partner's time. We each only get 24 hours in a day, and we have to treat our time as diamonds for anything to work.
Yeah. I remember reading the comment about the time and it being equal. And I was like, oh, yeah. Like, why have I not claimed that time? Why have I let all of those excuses come in for so long that, oh, well, I know how to do it. You know, I'll just take care of it. This, that, all these things. And I think I said this on our podcast when I interviewed you, but I realized that I was thinking, okay, what are things that Edgar does that he just does it without me like questioning it, asking, telling him how to do it, any of those things. And one of them was he takes care of the dogs. Ever since we had kids, he's on the dog thing. He makes sure they're fed, he gives them water, he takes them out, he makes sure they have their vet visits. He like is on the dogs. And it clicked to me, if he can take care of our damn dogs, he can do all these things for the kids. Like he can make those doctor's appointments. He can do all of these things. And I was like, oh, you know, like, yeah, I'm the mom, but he's the dad. Takes 2 to make a baby. And, you know, you're going to have to step up and do that. And yes, maybe for years I wasn't the breadwinner, but that doesn't matter when you're in a partnership, you know, and it also
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Time is not money. And that's why I say I'm not advocating for 50-50.
Yep.
I am not advocating for 50-50. I think it's the wrong equation. I think it's held us back. I'm advocating for ownership,
Yep.
for full dog days, like what Edgar did, for perceived fairness. Yep. Perceived fairness in the literature is actually more important than actual fairness in terms of partnerships. We are redefining teamwork, and nobody in a partnership should be tasked with all the unpaid labor of the partnership, regardless of what your situation is. For me, it was 85 cards, and we could talk a little bit about what the fair play cards are. This is your cheaper couples therapist. I love using cards as a mediation tool. They work really well because you're talking about the cards. You're not, it takes the emotion out of things. And so all fair play is exactly what Brooke said. What it is, it's a system that's based on the idea that just like in the workplace, you own your shit. And what I mean by that is that if you think about Netflix or Apple, all of our really successful companies, they talk a lot about context, not control. They talk about the beauty of being a DRI, the directly responsible individual. Hi, she's so cute. And basically that's the same idea, Brooke, as in fair play. It's the idea that when nobody walks into their boss's office and says, hey, what should I be doing today? I'll just wait until you tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. But that's how we treat our home, with no respect, with no rigor. We're deciding who's setting the table with such decision fatigue when we're hangry and tired. And so the advanced customizing your defaults, coming in to say, I'm going to be the DRI on these cards is really the key. It's how you treat your home. And I'll just give one quick example, and then we can dive into more of the consciousness raising. But the example is that if you think about mustard, all of you on the call, think about mustard. How did mustard get into your refrigerator? It didn't fly there. Somebody had to know your second son, Johnny, likes French's yellow mustard on his protein, otherwise he chokes. We'll need it. So that's in the project management, organizational management world, what we call conception. Then somebody has to monitor that mustard when it's running low, put it on a grocery list, survey the whole household to see what groceries you need. That is the planning stage. We call that the planning stage. And finally, someone has to get their butt to the store with the masks and the gloves now to go purchase that French's yellow mustard. Now, that is the execution phase. That's what we call execution. In my research in hetero-cisgender relationships, Brooke, that is where hetero-cisgender men are stepping in at the execution phase. And they bring home spicy Dijon, the gross kind with the seeds, every freaking time. And you ask for French's yellow. And don't you sit at our table with Johnny for 7 years? And haven't you watched him eat mustard? And all of a sudden, we're not talking about mustard anymore. We're talking about accountability and trust. Mm-hmm. So once you can bring accountability and trust back in the situation by handing over Edgar the full grocery card or the full pet care card for the day or forever, that's how we get to the unencumbered mind that Virginia Woolf talked about 100 years ago. And the beauty of science is that the month before Fair Play came out, a big giant Harvard study came out to confirm that, guess what? Women hold the conception and the planning for their family. They call it cognitive labor. I call it conception and planning, same thing. We're holding the behind the scenes tasks to get to that finish line. And that breakup is where those system inefficiencies happen.
Mm-hmm. They do. Someone put a question earlier in our Discord channel, and I thought this was probably a good time to kind of ask this and kind of lead us into also just how you can actually start taking some action from here too. Was that what one mom said that, so what's the solution to valuing women's time as an equal to men's time? My husband is very helpful and a hands-on father, but the invisible workload is still much heavier on my side than his. And when we talk about this, my husband's solution has always been that we should just hire a nanny and I go back to work full time. So I know that
well, it's in the book. And yeah. So let's go to that one quickly, but there is, that was a very popular toxic time message. I talk about all the toxic time messages and I actually break them all down so you can get your reframe. But I think the very, very popular one was this idea, if you, and I'll read it to you, not the whole thing, but this one, if you don't have enough time, outsource or get more help, right? So I say receiving outside support is useful. It could be a lifesaver, right? If you're lucky enough to afford it. But what most husbands, fathers overlook is the full amount of time it requires to find, enlist, schedule, delegate responsibilities, and often train and most certainly pay a babysitter, math tutor, house cleaner, and dog walker, etc. In my interviews, I found no correlation between soliciting help and less resentment between couples.
Yeah.
Zero. Because hiring someone to help still takes work, right? So I say the time reframe is hours spent researching, planning, scheduling, managing, maintaining communication and relationships, and finally handing off responsibilities to someone else and paying for help takes real time.
Yes.
So I think that's really an important discussion to think about how outsourcing is really is very problematic for a few reasons. Not that it's not helpful, but I think so many professional class women rely on outsourcing, and really what we're talking about is the undervalued labor of women of color. So I think that's a really important conversation we need to talk about. And second of all, it's a way men can get out of actually being a teammate. So what I will say is that's what the Fair Play cards do. That's why they're sourced using my expertise and also a professor of psychology, the top expert in the gender division of labor, Darby Saxby. We break the cards into suits. So what you can do is if you think that there are things you can outsource, there's a suit called Out for that and the home suit, but there's a caregiving and a magic suit, which is still 50 cards that cannot be outsourced. You're not going to outsource the tooth fairy. You're not going to outsource, you may outsource haircuts, but that bathing and grooming is probably going to be you. You're probably not going to outsource whether your child's adenoids are being taken out. So I would say start with the cards that you can't outsource. And the beauty of this game is that in situations like that, where your time may not be valued, is what you do the most important step is, and I'll talk to you about communication, because I think we first need to figure out how we even get to the table. But if you're at the table, what I ask you to do, and you'll see this in the book, and you can also download the cards on Fair Play Life, is I ask you to build your deck together. And this is 8 years of research. When people went straight to divvying up the workload, fair play became just another list. If you decide to build your deck together, the toxic time message that was most popular for men, which was my wife does all this unnecessary stuff, fell away. When you visualize what is necessary for your home, I found that the buy-in from heterosexual men is substantially higher. Almost nobody says no to the exercise of, when you're, we'll talk about how to communicate how you want to do this, the exercise of building your deck together. Not who's doing what, but how do you come up with what is valuable, what unpaid labor is valuable for your household.
Mm-hmm. I think that one thing that this question actually brought up to me too, is that just how right Eve's research is that especially now with everything that happened with COVID, we as a family, we had literally, our kids were at school all day or with a nanny. I was working full time. My husband was working full time. And there was still resentment there. There still were some things that came up, even though we were doing pretty good at Fair Play for a while. Like we were doing really good. But then COVID hit and we were like, no childcare, no help, no support, back to ground zero. What do we do? And we couldn't outsource, like when we were faced with like the fact that we could not do that. We also didn't have our house cleaner coming anymore during, this time, and a lot of other things happening. And so we kind of had to refigure out that deck. And luckily we had the tools from Eve's book to be able to sit down and come to the table and have that conversation. And, I will say this, having been resentful of my spouse multiple times because of him not like stepping into that workload. He is a great dad. And me and Chloe talk about sometimes, like our husbands are like probably 90 percentile of like being really great dads. That's fine, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, because if you're feeling resentful, then it's going to just continue to snowball. And so now we're both home, and I said, okay, let's talk about this. What are we going to split up? What are we going to do? How are we going to figure out this schedule? And I know I've talked to you about this. Like I have morning meetings, he has evening meetings, but then like we're doing this whole day summit for 3 days. So I said, I need you to take off 3 days. Yeah. Like my time is valuable. It's a huge time for me and my company. Like you need to do this. He took off 3 days, no questions asked. Would he have done that 6 months ago before all of this? We would have had some questions. I don't know if he would have. And it wouldn't have necessarily even meant the same amount of work, because the kids would have been in school and all of that. But he's got them all day today dealing with it. And so you have to claim not just that your time is equal to that, to your spouse's, to your partner's, but I think also really claiming that whatever you're doing is very valuable too, and whatever is important to you. And that we can maybe talk about that in a minute. Like, what is your unicorn work? What's your unicorn space? You have to claim that and own it. And I think oftentimes as women, and especially as moms, we don't value that. We don't value our time at all, like you've talked about, and we don't value what we do and what we bring to the table. And so that's why we let the men do what they need. They do it. They do it. We can't fault ourselves, or we can't fault them for everything, because we've let them do it. Like you write down in your book, we are a part of our oppression. We have let that come to be. So
absolutely. And again, private lives are public issues. My favorite sociologist, C. Wright Mills, says this. A movement, it means that you're not alone.
Yeah.
This is happening to women all over the socioeconomic spectrum. Even single moms are using Fair Play to say like, wow, this is a systemic issue. I don't have to do all this shit.
Yes.
I can't put all this pressure on myself because I don't have the societal supports. So it is all of us supporting each other to say, and I really want to talk, Brooke, about how you get to the table. But before that, I think it is important to talk about about this permission to be unavailable. Before we get into the actual rule 3 and 4, start where you are and how do you establish your values and systems. So we'll talk about how do you really enter fair play, or at least how do you start communicating about domestic life in a new way that will promote a practice and systems. We'll talk about that. But before that, I think just spending 5 minutes of what you just said, Brooke, around the permission to be unavailable, the permission to take 3 days for your summit, and to ask when emotion is low, cognition is high, for that time back from your teammate, your partner, is really, really valuable. And especially for women after kids, because I talk a lot about, especially now, do we have any fucking boundaries? Do we have any space and time to be more than just a parent and a partner and a worker? Taking that space for what I call your happiness trio, which again is going to sound very annoying if you have a pen that's stabbing you in the vagina like I did. I didn't want to hear about find your passion and purpose. But what I found actually in my research is that what I call unicorn space, the active pursuit of what makes you you, different than self-care, and which is so important to in adult friendships. Adult friendships, that's self-explanatory. Self-care, reading a book, not commodified wellness. I'm not talking about, you need to buy press-on nails because that's a $415 billion beauty industry. I'm talking about true self-care, reading a book in the bath. That's really, really important. And we talk a lot about that as women. But what we don't talk about is what I call unicorn space. The scientific term is something called eudaimonia. And Brooke, it's what you're doing right now. It's taking it's how I redefine creativity. It's taking what makes you uniquely you, and you're sharing it with the world by the summit. And how you aggregated different mothers. You have a very unique point of view. You have a beautiful podcast. I love your voice. And that is, to me, I will identify that as your unicorn space. For me, the curiosity to sit down and start researching the gender division of labor was my unicorn space. For some women, they're sending me amazing pictures of themselves, working on new businesses, crocheting Harry Potter dolls. I have one woman who sent me her volunteer firefighters curriculum. So it's this idea of what makes you you and how do you share that with the world. It's very, very important. We make zero time for it, especially if it's not paid. I was not paid for 7 years of research before I wrote Fair Play. But I knew it was valuable and important. So I would carve out that time for Seth and say, I'm spending time today researching this issue, and I have 3 hours in the morning. I'd like to do that. And then I'll take the kids for 3 hours in the afternoon on a Saturday, and that's how we'll spend our day. So that, investing in my time to be unavailable, my permission to be unavailable to my family is a really important thing. Other people are doing it in a very destructive way. I had women saying to me they're looking up ex-boyfriends on Facebook, emotional affairs. So you can have a permission to be unavailable in a destructive way, or you can do it in a really constructive way, which is being uniquely you and sharing that with the world and whatever capability that is beyond your role as a parent, a partner, and a worker. So that's rule 2.
Yes, I love that. And you know how much I love the idea of like having that unicorn space and being unavailable. And it's so hard. I mean, like, just to speak I feel like this is one of the hardest things that I had to overcome, was letting myself, especially as a business owner too, like letting myself be unavailable. And I thought about it in the sense of, if I'm going to take a day off from my team because I need to regroup or I need a moment off, but had I asked for that time off from my family? No, so how do you claim that time? And I know that I mentioned this a little earlier today, but when Edgar started going down his crazy meditation journey, he would claim 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes at night. And I was like, but my time is equal. Like, I need that time. And so now I claim that too. And I mean, that was huge because I get the time to fill my cup up. I claim that same exact amount of time, so we don't question it. Like this morning, he was like, oh, I'm not going to take my time because I know you're stressed and you need to get ready for it. And I said, no, you're going to claim that time because I'm taking the whole day, honey. I was like, you were going to go take that time. And needed it. I knew he needed it. But I wasn't like mad that he went and did that, and it was okay. And so I think that
you've talked about it in advance, and you have a communication practice, Brooke, which is what I love about you guys, and why I keep coming back to you, because you are amazing cultural warriors for a movement to more fairness by communicating and being helpful and understanding fair play to its core, which is this idea that it's not about scorekeeping, it's about ownership. It's about owning that full mustard situation. But in the case of unicorn space, or self-care or adult friendships, the happiness trio that actually is correlated directly to our mental health and our physical health, that's where I do encourage scorekeeping. Because what I found, and what Professor Darby Saxby, her research shows, is that men take twice as much leisure time as women. Actually, the men who take the most leisure time are stay-at-home dads, actually, and not stay-at-home mothers. And so this idea of how do we want to promote each other's happiness trio, to me, is the opposite of the midlife crisis. What I found is that, Brooke, the midlife crisis is not Ferraris, it's not breast implants. It is that we resent when the other person takes their happiness trio, because we may not be getting ours. So the only time I promote scorekeeping and fair play is around the happiness trio, around claiming your unicorn space, your self-care, and your friendships, that you ask for equal time. Because too many men became the case of the triathlete, and all of a sudden we're taking 9 hours on Saturdays and Sundays to train. But I was like, wait a second, you did nothing. I know you. Before children, you did nothing. Now all of a sudden you're a triathlete. I get it. I want to leave my house too. But making sure that you get that equal time.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It's so important. And I know that that's probably one of the hardest things to take action on as a mom too. Like, you know, you can come to the table, you can start talking about these issues, but really claiming that unavailable time is a struggle. And it took me a while. So do know that, like, if you're going to enter into the world of fair play, that might not come as fast, but take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes, work yourself up. So then you're really claiming that time, and both you and your partner understand that this is that time, like this is that sacred unicorn time and space. So you feel good about giving it to them, and they feel good about giving it to you. And it's kind of this
absolutely. And often if you use a friend for that space, I find that you become more accountable for it. And I call those spiritual friends. That, you know, Brooke, you're a spiritual friend. It doesn't have to be someone you know forever. It could be that you and I want to sign up together for a business course. Mm-hmm. Or I have a friend in New York who we do the Debbie Allen dance class together. Because we both wanted to go. We ended up at Stuyvesant, but we wanted to both be at LaGuardia, which was the fame school. Mm-hmm. And so, but we ended up at Stuyvesant. We both, like, our dream careers otherwise would be like backup hip hop dancers. So we take a lot of dance classes together. Bring a spiritual friend with you on that journey, because then you're more accountable, and then also your partner probably will respect it more. Where you say, "Well, I'm not going to leave Rebecca on the Moroccan cooking Zoom alone. We're going to do it together."
Yes, for sure. And, I mean, a lot of my husband doesn't play golf or is not a huge sports person, but if your husband like goes and does that, or your spouse does, some kind of, they go play basketball, they go, running, they go play golf, whatever it is, they usually a lot of times are bringing their friends with them too. So you can do that too, and make
sure. As a mediator often said, I said, families spend too much time together, especially now in this pandemic. I think we conflate spending time together with quality time. Mm-hmm. And what I say is, like, spend more time alone. Go, have a permission to be unavailable. You don't both need to go to Costco, because you're going to end up getting that barbecue buffalo wing tray that you can't even afford, and you're going to forget the diapers. Like, own your shit, spend time apart, come together for meaningful family engagement. Mm-hmm. But too many couples do everything together, and that merger is really not fair play, and it's definitely not healthy.
It's not. And my husband is a big introvert, and so I joke with him that, like, this pandemic was great for him because he's like not the one to always go out and do things with people, but even he feels it, especially because he normally works remote anyway. So we were going to do things with friends and family, and like getting out and being, I was way more than that, but for him, it was definitely like a big change. So we found that like my brother, because he's been quarantining himself too, so he'll come over on the weekends, and it's nice because my brother and him and Edgar are friends, so he gets that time and space too. So and then usually I get to do something by myself while they're looking after the kids. So it works. Everybody's
That's right. It's like, see ya.
yes.
Yes. Yes. And I think that leads us to really this idea of how do you connect? Because if it's not over, like who's fighting because you both forgot the diapers at Costco when you went, you know, for that, but you ended up with a buffalo wing tray you didn't even want to have. It's because that's just a system inefficiency. I call the double up in fair play. But really coming to the table is really important. And I think I want to acknowledge Elise in the chat. She said something really powerful about being a single mom now and leaving an abusive relationship. So that is amazing for you to be able to have the courage to do that. So obviously systems are not going to work if you're in a verbal or abusive relationship. But if you are in a relationship where you feel that there is a baseline of trust, then the best thing to do is to recognize, and these are just the 3 steps I want to end with. Recognize, step 1 is recognize you're already communicating. So this is really the second and third and fourth rule of fair play. I'm going to combine them into one. Rule 3 is start where you are. And so that's really a communication rule. So what do I mean by that? Well, it means that we want to recognize that we're already communicating. So many women, Brooke, and especially since I've been on the Zoom circuit, have said things to me. It would never even occur to me to use my voice. And that makes me so sad because these are such successful, smart women in every other area. But using their voice in the home is something that comes foreign to them. They say, I want to keep the peace. I wouldn't even know how to have this conversation. So one woman says that to me, I wouldn't even know how to communicate about domestic life, so I don't. And then 20 minutes later, Brooke, I'm writing in my notes, dumps wet clothes on husband's pillow when he forgets to put them in the dryer. Another woman said, I can't communicate about domestic life, it's too triggering. And then I'm writing, found out she has Instagram account called Shit My Husband Doesn't Pick Up, where she's publicly shaming him on Instagram. I infiltrated a Facebook group called The Reasons I Hate My Husband. It's a 27,000 member Facebook group. One woman in the group recently said, if my husband dies during COVID-19, it's not because of the virus, it'll be because of me. DM'd her, she says, not really communicating about domestic life. I said, okay, but you're willing to publicly threaten murder of your partner in a public forum. So what I want to just say is that we are already communicating about domestic life. Brooke, as you know, I say this to you before, I can go on your Nest Cam. I'll see 5 ways you and Edgar communicated today about domestic life. As a mediator, I don't even need to see your mouth move. And I think that's really, really important because it is really about the idea that I'm asking for a communication shift, not a start. And so that's rule number 1, recognize you're already communicating. Now, in our few minutes, I'd love to just do this quiz if anybody wants to weigh in on the chat. Brooke, can I do this with you?
Yes. Yeah.
You're a good role model because you allow yourself to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So this is a reverse newlywed game, even if you're not newlywed. So let's think about how you communicate, because this is helpful. I see in the chat for if you're co-parenting with somebody, if you have a parent that you're having to live with, if you're a single parent, for anybody else in your support system you're communicating with, to recognize you're already communicating about domestic life with whoever they are. Obviously, this is a quiz that applies to partners as well. So Brooke, I'm going to read you 7 top vulnerabilities that I found as a family mediator were presenting in my clients over a decade. And I want to know what Edgar would say about you.
Okay. So,
and anybody wants to weigh in on the chat, it'll help us sort of end the last 10 minutes with some customized communication advice.
Yeah.
So remember, number 1, you are already communicating. So let's think about what our vulnerabilities are when we communicate. And then we'll talk about why. So I'm going to read you 7. Tell me what Edgar would say about you. Okay. Just pick 1. 1, long-winded. Wah, wah, wah. You're talking and no one's listening. 2, sharp command, sir. Your drill sergeant tone and delivery isn't popular with the troops. 3, bad timing. You drop your grievances and requests for help into the conversation at inopportune moments. Thanks for the flowers, honey, but you forgot dishwashing detergent again. 4, toxic word choice. I wasn't going to say anything, but I really hate it when you ... 5, all or nothing. You never replace the toilet paper roll. You always leave the seat up. 6, dredging up the past. This is just like the last time you forgot to ... Or 7, boiling over. I wasn't going to say anything. I didn't say anything. I avoided the conversation, but now I'm really pissed. Okay, so 1, long-winded, 2, sharp commands, 3, bad timing, 4, toxic word choice, 5, all or nothing, 6, dredging up the past, or 7, boiling over. What would Edgar say about you?
7.
7?
Yep.
Okay, let's see what everybody else says. Okay, we have a sharp commands, okay, a tone, which is related to boiling over, so that's great. So I think let's start there. Because if you pick, oh, I love that someone says 4, 5, and 6. That's good. Yes, there are dredging up the paths. Ouch. I love that. So let's start with, then Nicole, we have a 1 through 4. So we'll talk about 1 in a minute. But let's talk about absolutes, the all or nothing. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about all or nothing, boiling over, which you just said, and tone, which is mine. I'm a very sharp tone that came from probably growing up in Avenue C and 14th Street, or talking to my mother when I'm 7 about what she has to do. So what do we do when we recognize our vulnerabilities? And these are them. Well, recognize that those vulnerabilities, we'll talk about long-winded separately. The vulnerabilities that most of the chat just identified in the number 7, boiling over, is about communicating when emotion is low and cognition is high. That's what I'm asking you to do. So when you're in a vulnerability like boiling over, it's usually because you're communicating when emotion is high. This is your recognize that feedback in the moment is toxic, whether it's in your workplace or whether it's in your home. So that is the hardest principle of fair play, to recognize that communication is a practice, whether it's with your employees, employers, or your partner. And a practice of communication, just like a meditation practice that Edgar is familiar with, requires doing it over and over again. You can't say to Edgar, meditate once and then you'll be calm for the rest of your life. You can't communicate once and be in the practice for the rest of your life. And that's what a boiling over is. It's I don't want the practice of communication. And so I'm going to hold it and hold it and hold it till I finally can't hold it any longer. So that's why I will say, when you're communicating when emotion is low and cognition is high, that is the best. So that is the 3rd rule. So 1, recognize you have a vulnerability. 2, if it's a vulnerability like boiling over a tone, it's probably because you're giving feedback in the moment. So 3 is find a time, a practice, when you can communicate when emotion is low and cognition is high. And for Seth and me, it's 10 minutes a night now. We set a timer. So for any of you who identifies long-winded, set a timer. We set a timer for 10 minutes. And we don't always get at everything, but we are starting to recognize how valuable the nightly check-in is, because days we don't do the nightly check-in, usually the next day is somewhat of a shit show. And so then we have to go back to our nightly check-in and say, damn, we wanted to avoid and boil over, but actually not so helpful. Let's just do the 10-minute invest in the check-in. And then finally, the last rule. So that's our communication, how you start where you are. The last thing I'll end on is begin with your why. If you begin with your why, it eliminates the needs to lower your standards, which is super shaming, or for men to raise their standards. It is back to what you heard in the chat, that answer I had before about when you sit down with this mediation tool or yourself, and you don't want to use it, but you just want to start talking, start with your why. And what I mean by that is, I'll give one last example over garbage. So Brooke, when I was developing the Fair Play system, Seth really understood what Edgar was doing. He understood ownership, conception, planning, and execution. If you hold pets, doesn't mean taking them to doggy daycare. It means feeding them, giving them special vitamins, making sure they pooped. It is full dog day. You can redeal, but if you have dogs on Wednesday, it's full dog day. That's the ownership piece. So Seth got that, and he knew that we were starting with garbage, a few cards, and he knew that that meant getting the trash bins out and putting the damn liner back in. See, there goes my tone again. I didn't say it like that. He understood that. But what was happening to me was I was still following him around the kitchen like his garbage shadow. I was just, and he'd turn around, I'd be there. And I would open doors under the sink and hope he would fall over the sink so that he would find a liner and be like, oops, it's going to take the garbage out now. And the ownership wasn't working. And that's when I backed up. This was a couple years ago, and said, this system is not going to work without adding in the decade-long experience I've had with families, which is the values-based mediation practice, which is you start with your why. So when I sat down with Seth when emotion was low and cognition was high, and I was able to say, I want to explain to you why I care about garbage. You know my mother, you know things were hectic with me growing up, but what you don't know is that I didn't have a garbage can growing up. And what instead we had was cockroaches and water bugs everywhere. This is the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It was not clean, especially if you didn't put your garbage away. I couldn't drink, Brooke, I couldn't get water after night because you turn on the lights and there would just be scattering of bugs everywhere. And so Seth, when I see a banana peel peeking out over that full garbage, I'm 7 again. I'm a latchkey kid. And that's the personal trigger for why I care. And then he was able to say to me, Brooke, I had a housekeeper growing up. I slept on Domino's pizza boxes. I don't give a shit about garbage. So what happens when you're so divergent on something that has to get done all day? Well, 30% of us divorce over this, or ultimately we come to our minimum standard of care. What we both can agree on, it does take a 20-minute conversation, but then it's like miracle. It's like Moses walking on water. Things start happening without you having to remind your partner to do them. Our minimum standard of care is once a night. Seth takes out the garbage once a day, right before we go to bed. He puts it in his work calendar. He says, as long as I never mention garbage ever again. So I sometimes mention it just to remind him that I appreciate that he's doing it. But it's about how do we invest in our conversations and our communication the same way we're investing in toilet paper, or that we're investing in meditation or exercise. It's probably even more important than sitting in a dark room by ourselves right now.
Yes, yes. Oh, for sure. I love any time that I get to hear from you and I feel like I learned something new, or I'm thinking about, oh, we could adjust this or we could change this. And it's all, I want all of our moms to know too today that, like, no matter where you are in this journey, whether you've never had a conversation with your partner about this at all, which is most people, or you have had multiple conversations or fights or arguments about it, that you can still start over and have this conversation. And I think the best thing to do is to remember what Eve just said about, you want to have those conversations when you're, no, I'm not going to say it. When your
emotion is low, cognition is high.
Cognition is high. There we go. Because
that's never, by the way, when children are around.
Never.
It is never. And so I just want to remind you that children make you existentially happier, but they do not make you happier on a daily basis. Yep. Women and men rank root canals higher than taking care of children. Yes. So I will say that we have to recognize that those conversations are probably not going to happen when your children are around.
Yes. And make the time. If it's 10 minutes in the evening, 10 minutes in the morning, Edgar and I do a check-in in the evening. What's on our calendar for the next day? What are things that are like something with the kids that's happening or whatever? And then we do one again in the morning. And that's how we survive and thrive. And I think that's the most important thing that you can do right now, is to start having those conversations, because we're all home and we need to, because we don't want to see.
I want to plug this too.
Yes.
So Fair Play works really well with how to raise an adult. There's a lot in this beautiful book about how do you raise an adult? How do you get to your child to college where they don't come home completely broken and full of anxiety? Well, Professor Hames also talks about how important it is to complete tasks with executive function from start to finish. So even if you aren't ready to get your partner involved, I encourage you to go on Fair Play Life. You can sign up for the newsletter because we have tools all the time, but play the Fair Play Life guessing game with your kids, which a lot of women are telling me, and men are telling me they're doing, meaning they say to their children, click on garbage. I want you to name 5 things in 5 minutes or in 15 seconds that you think is involved in garbage. And then you can flip the card over and you'll see on the back what the start to finish is, the conception, planning, execution. Because at the end of the day, this is about how we raise humans. This is the Momentum Summit. And I think what I want to just leave on is one woman who said to me recently, that COVID has taught her that while she was okay doing it all, she's actually not okay having her daughter and son watch her do it all.
Yep. I think that is the best way to end it, and how to really give us that push to not let our kids see that. We don't want them to see that, because we don't want our kids to have to do it all. We want them to thrive and be doing wonderful, amazing things. So if comes back to your why, I think that is what it needs to be. So thank you so much, Eve,
Thank
for
you all. Thank
chatting.
you for spending your precious time with us.
Of course, yes. And thank you so much. Everybody was chatting in our other channel too. Just everybody loved hearing from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Go and get her book in our Summit store. Go get Fair Play. Start reading it. Start thinking about it and how you can communicate with your spouse. So thank you so much.
Bye. Have a great night. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.